Yes, thank you. Thank you, Deepak. Hello, everyone. So I guess to introduce ourselves, we have, this is, as you can see, I am from Routray. I'm the Vice President for Marketing. And a little bit about us, we started in digitizing agriculture. So doing everything from farmer profiling to remote sensing to, kind of a supply chain visibility. And so around 2 years back when we saw that, okay, all of this in a way culminates in bringing transparency and traceability. And that's how we moved into traceability. So, so that also in a way explains that, traceability is not something that you begin with. For even us as a tech company, traceability is something that we ended with after 7 years of operations. Currently, we work in 4 continents. The number of countries is now 29. We added Vietnam last evening. We don't directly work with farmers. We are a B2B software platform, but the number of farmers impacted by our solution or touched by our solution is more than 1 million now. But today's session, I think I'll come to traceability later, but what I want to talk about is first, how do you look at data and how does data affect supply chains? Because, we have been talking about data for a long time, but unless you specifically say, define that data, it ends up becoming a very generic idea that all of us talk about power of data, digitizing data, kind of insights and analytics, but unless you talk very specifically that, okay, as a stakeholder, what does that data mean for me? How do I gain by, bringing that data onto a platform? It becomes very ethereal. So here in supply chains, I guess the kind of data that we see is, that is data on produce and which is also producer. So there are 2 kinds of data. One is the farmer and what the farmer grows. There is data on quality, which now I guess we have very slowly started to digitize. We have started to bring AI and computer imaging into this. So quality, which has been poorly and one of the biggest challenges and continues to be something that's, you still go by touch and feel, will be digitized. So then there is data on logistics. I guess here during the COVID, we learned the impact that non-digitization had on this. So I remember throughout the first month, all of us were on WhatsApp groups talking to each other saying, do you have a truck? Somebody has some 500 kilograms of, let's say, bananas in Andhra Pradesh. So, there was no uniform platform. There was no way to talk to each other. There was no method to collaborate. So all that data was with us in our pen and paper systems or on our own phones. And we eventually had to rely on Excel sheets and WhatsApp. I mean, I remember we put up we created something called the Agri Logistics Network, and there are just 8 companies on it. Just 8 companies saying, where they're operating, what kind of trucks they have, and what is the capacity of those trucks. It was not even real time. So all it had is their footprint and their resources. And that sheet got around 1,000 views, and there are people who are saying, okay, no, thank you so much for putting this sheet together because now we have somebody to call. So, what the pandemic has done is kind of these were the fault lines and they were always there. Just that we used to gloss over it. We never felt the need that, you need that data. You will probably ask someone, you will probably go to Google and find a logistic company. But, if an Excel sheet could be such a relief in time of disruption, imagine what a platform can do, where you can probably talk to each other about collaborating on hiring one truck or finding out. It can also be about, the next stage, which is storage. It can also be about cold chains and warehouses. I mean, India has done so many experimentations on cold chains and warehouses. How do you make them more efficient? How do you bring a small farmer to it? Is it all about cost? Is it about logistics? Is it about market volatility? Because, if they store the produce, they don't exactly get the money out. By the time they are able to sell it, the storage cost is more than the profit they generate. So, there has been a lot of thinking going on. A lot of work has happened. Now we are talking about distributed storages, on order, on demand, cold chains. But unless you have data of, what is the produce, because not all produce requires the same kind of storing. So the temperature differs, the humidity differs, the size, the return, the price, everything differs. So the point is, unless, if it's a business that you're trying to run, you need to find out, this is my onion hub, this is my, let's say, the bhindi hub. So you need to know what kind of storage you're building and who are you selling to, what is the, what is the produce in time, in what season. So now we are talking about a whole level of not just random data, not just of small market research, but data which is structured, which is there, which is hopefully real time, and which is collaborative. So when we say how do we join the dots, there are two challenges. One is, who is going to do this? And second, how do you do this? And who will depend on how? If a private player does it, I mean, I guess, Prateek from Satcho is one of the speakers, and we'll tell you how they put together a platform on finding storages and warehouses. So let's say, and they made it free, but the point is that sustainable? I don't know, Prateek will answer. But if a private player is going to do it, how do you monetize it? What data is private? What data is non-private? And who pays? So then we come to, if the private doesn't do it, if a public-private partnership does it, or if the government does it, the way we see with ENAM, which is a very public initiative. So then what happens to data regulation? How do you have access to it? And also process of transparency come into play. So in altogether, what we are talking about is two things. One is digitize what is not digital. Second, how do you make the best of that digitization? How do you enable collaboration, and how do you bring multiple stakeholders on one platform? Now, when we talk about supply chain data, there are two kinds of data. So one is the internal data. When I say internal, it means internal to an ecosystem, internal to a company, internal to, let's say, a company and a processor. But anyway, it's between a limited number of players. When you talk about ecosystem data, that's when we are saying, what's happening in the Nordic countries, where the ecosystem data is very high. Where the governments and the regional governments, they are using data to plan government's policy on agriculture and food. So when we come to internal data, these are the typical touch points. I mean, they can differ from crop to crop, but these are whether that is processing or not, whether that is packing or not, whether it ends with a retail or a processing. But the point is, more or less, this is the value chain that you will see across most producers. So the customer, if it's a global customer, there will be import export involved. But in all this, and especially when we are talking about import and export, and that's where we work with most of the businesses in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in India. So that's when you kind of start valuing data, because if you're exporting, I mean, if there are any exporters on this call, you will know there are compliance rules. There are transparency rules. There are brands which say, okay, no, you need to know where the produce is coming from. Is it ethically grown? Was there deforestation? Was child labor involved? What is the social metrics of the farmers? So there are different pushes and pulls. So it can be legal and compliance, or it can be a responsible branding kind of a requirement. But in all this, now we see that more and more companies are reaching out to us because they want this internal data digitized. So how many farmers, which clusters, what is the quality of that cluster? Because if something is returned, if something is rejected in Europe or in US, it's very expensive. You need to identify that which of your cluster is not doing very well. You need to identify which farmer is kind of not giving optimal produce, and that's when your your whole value chain comes into being. That okay, what is your quality testing parameter? Are you doing it still manually? Do you have machines for it? Do you have the cost to employ a computer imaging or AI enabled tool? So now companies are kind of looking back at their processes and also looking at cost. Because right now, unless all your aggregation happens in one place, the costs are high. So we deal in traceability, but our cost, I'll say most of our customers are large food and agri companies, but we are not exactly on the expensive side of things. Because we don't have tools, we don't exactly have, we are asset light, we don't have hardware, so the cost is still relatively less. But when you bring in quality testing and you're looking at offshore markets, then at least you need to start somewhere. You need to start at least by digitizing your data points. And why you need it is, apart from efficiency and reducing losses, etc., which also happens in local markets. Let's say you supply to a big supermarket, and one of your produce is being rejected on a consistent basis. So how do you bring that kind of insights? If you are storing, if you don't have your own warehouses or cold chains, and you're using third-party resources, are you losing more in one place and not in the other? So in a way, you need to make your supply chain efficient. You also need to look at the loopholes. So unless you have data, it's guesswork. One manager will know it, one procurement officer will know it. But once you have digitized all of this, you have one dashboard where you're making data-driven decisions. So when you look at ecosystem data, because I'm not too sure if anybody from the government is here, but this is where we have been, we have been pushing for this for last 3-4 years. I mean, Niti Aayog has now started talking about a national agri stack. They started talking about national health stack around 2.5 years back. But these are kind of when we talk about data and national platforms, I understand we also get into debates about privacy and all that regulation. But in agriculture, we need this. So we need to have a national agri stack where the planning is not done by states or districts or by individual farmers or companies. Where do you know that, okay, the weather, the soil, the inputs, what is Rajasthan good for? What is Maharashtra good for? I mean, what is a particular region within Maharashtra good for? So then what you can do is, okay, you can actually rationalize subsidies. If you're growing sugarcane in an area where there is no water, you should not get subsidies. And in fact, currently most of our climate change crisis that India is facing is because of subsidies, right? Because we are just subsidizing across the board. We are not subsidizing the right crops in the right area, or we are not subsidizing the right things. We don't talk about power. We don't talk about water. So they're still non-monetized. So the point is, okay, unless you have large-scale planning, which brings that data on one platform, we saw how companies will benefit from this, but unless we see how governments and whole ecosystems will benefit from this, I'll say, look at behavior analysis. So our agri minister a long time back had said, why onion prices kind of vary so much from season to season, because they had done one pilot with dehydrated onions, but consumers did not like that, didn't like the taste of it. They did not accept the product. But was that pilot long enough? Was it advertised enough? The moment a private company launches a product, there is a lot of market research, that is a lot of marketing, there is a lot of campaigning done to change the way the consumer was doing that behavior before. So as a government, if you're trying to change that, change people's behavior and consumption, we also need data points on why, why, how, and what's the road forward. So, here is how, what we learned from COVID, and here is why we think, and we have seen that. I mean, as one individual company, I can't exactly talk about the whole ecosystem, but we have seen a growth in queries, in the nature of those queries, and also with the interest that people want to talk, even if it's not going to end up in a business deal, people want to talk, people want to find out. So I think, we'll see increased digitization, but will they be random, separate efforts, or can they be combined together to have more impact? That will be the answer we all seek. So, the technologies that we're going to see increased adoption in coming years will be mobile technologies, where you enable your farm clusters, you enable your ground staff with an app. It could be anything. I mean, it could be the objective of that app or that objective of that digital tool can be anything which your process needs, but we'll see a rise of that. Warehouse and logistics monitoring, I mean, I guess the efforts are increasing. You see so many new startups in this area, but this area will see tremendous growth in coming years. Data stack, again, I mean, I guess until we can't really depend on the government, we should come together to do this. And that's what we are doing. I mean, we do traceability, but now we are reaching out to, let's say, soil sensing company or a quality testing company, a warehousing company, and we are talking to more and more partners on how our platform, or how can we come together so that the end customer doesn't have to go to 4 different companies looking for 4 different solutions. Can he come to any one of us and say, okay, here is what the solution I need, and I don't want to go and talk to 4 people. So is there a a kind of a back room, a collaboration behind the scenes where we are not making it difficult for a consumer to adopt technology? Traceability, I'll come to it. That's what we do anyway. So, to talk precisely about what we do, for 7 years, I mean, we have been working on food production system in agriculture. But the trend that you see now is there is a food tech, there is an Agritech, and there is also a supply chain technology which is completely produce agnostic. Currently, if you look at technologies, they will be supplying to medicine companies, they will be talking to agri companies, to food companies, to no matter what the produce is, the supply chain solution remains the same. So what we have done is we have put together one platform which caters to the whole journey of food from seed to table. And also now we are working with, I mean, we're in talks with, let's say, a Peruvian company, a Singaporean company, where we are talking about the other 180-degree, where you also look at food waste. So how do you go from table to farm? Because food waste is then converted into animal feed and then goes back into the food cycle. So, how do you digitize that part? So there is a Peruvian company which is talking about turning that into a carbon point model. So can a traceability solution be used there? We are kind of exploring that option. So these are the benefits. I'll skip. So what you have done is, you kind of digitize the whole agri value chain. So what you are doing is, okay, for every commodity, this will be different. And I'll show you how, we work massively in cotton and cocoa, for which cotton value chain is very different. For cocoa is very different. Now we are working on honey, which looks very, very different. So, when we talk about solution, I mean, is your solution ready to kind of cater to different value chains and different products? Okay, I just have 1 minute, so I'll, okay, this is what we work in. Okay, so this is how our solution works, which brings you, kind of a, as I showed you, it's customizable for every commodity. We help you monitor every stage, and we bring you in-depth farm insights and all that without being asset heavy, without costing too much, without bringing, without having a very steep learning curve for your staff. So here is how it works. I mean, I guess the tool is a QR code. And through QR code, we are helping businesses, tell stories, tell kind of a, pass on more information to the stakeholders, and also collaborate with other partners.